Welcome to Natu Reads, an audio library of revolutionary texts. Scripting the Change. Selected writings of Anuradha Ghandy. Preface. Anuradha Ghandy's writings, whether they be short reports on contemporary social and political issues, or research papers and booklets on theoretical and ideological debates, had the quality of sharpness, terseness, and clearly defined political stands. They were not only well researched and placed in their historical context, but also showed the depth of a writer having a philosophical outlook and ideological commitment. The dialectical relationship of theory and practice, where one enriches the other, seems to be the cornerstone of her work and life. We present in this volume a compilation of the works of Anu, as she was fondly known among her friends and comrades. Besides her significant writings on the women's and caste struggles, we have also brought together pieces that give a sense of the variety, breadth, and sheer volume of her writing, despite being involved in intense field activity. Some have been retrieved from crumbling, browned newsprint magazines with scrawled logos and cartoons, like Adhikaraksha, Kalam, Tingi, etc., that were published and distributed by activist groups in the 1970s and 1980s. Others from prestigious and widely read journals like EPW and Frontier. Some are from booklets from the women's movement or the papers published by a cultural organization. Others have been written by her under a pseudonym as they appeared in magazines that supported and propagated Maoist ideology. But whatever the source may be, each piece is interesting, argumentative, or constitutes some page from the history of struggle which has perhaps not been recorded elsewhere. Perhaps the most significant contribution of Anu has been in understanding the caste question from a Marxist point of view. Hers has been an honest and pungent analysis of the economic basis of caste, and how it manifests itself in both the base and superstructure. She was one of the pioneers linking the caste system to the existing relations of production. With deep insights into Indian history, she showed how the Indian feudal system was basically caste-linked, and the ideology of Indian feudalism was Brahmanism. She further elucidated how the Dalit question and untouchability act as one of the major pillars of the caste system. Finally, as was her nature of being a theoretician cum activist, she brought out how destruction of the caste system is intrinsic to any anti-feudal struggle and overall democratization of society. The other issue that has aroused similar debate is the understanding of the gender question. A great deal of Anu's writings on the trends in feminism, women and the trade union movement, and women in the Naxalite movement have helped throw light upon these issues. Anu pointed out that, by arguing for an autonomous women's movement, the socialist feminists were in fact weakening the broader movement against capitalism, imperialism, feudalism, and patriarchy. By placing patriarchy as the main enemy of women, the radical and cultural feminists were delinking patriarchy from the systems of capitalism and feudalism which produced it. By equally emphasizing production and reproduction as the reasons for gender oppression, feminists were bringing reproduction into the economic base and negating women's significant role in production. Most significantly, she points out that the strategy of bourgeois feminism is not to unite women with the working class and peasantry and fight the system, but rather to form small women's groups advocating lifestyle changes within the system. Anu tried to show through her work and writings that it is, in fact, by participating in the revolutionary movement that women try to throw off the shackles of patriarchy and hit at its roots. She was developing theoretical formulations on how women need revolution and revolution needs women. And, just like her counterparts in other countries, she too admitted that patriarchy existed within the revolutionary movement. The point was how to stay within it and combat it, not leave the movement and grumble about it. The simple piece in this volume on poetic aspirations of tribal women in Bastar is just such an example to show this. The collection also includes some of her journalistic writings of the 1970s, 1980s, and early 1990s, written for various activist magazines. If all of her reports and articles of this period could be collected, it would be a historical document of the time when the student movement, trade union movement, and even the civil liberties movement were vibrant and powerful, and so much a part of people's lives and culture. Anu was both a seasoned activist and brilliant theoretician, and will surely be remembered as one of the leading woman communists of India. She is no more today. Her writings, only some of which are presented in this volume, will not only serve as a permanent reminder of her work, but also as the beacon for the coming generations of the activists striving for liberation of the toiling people of the country. Foreword. But Anuradha was different. Arundhati Roy. That is what everyone who knew Anuradha Ghandy says. That is what almost everyone whose life she touched thinks. She died in a Mumbai hospital on the morning of 12 April 2008 of malaria. She had probably picked it up in the jungles of Jharkhand, where she had been teaching study classes to a group of Adivasi women. In this great democracy of ours, Anuradha Ghandy was known as a Maoist terrorist, liable to be arrested, or, more likely, shot in a fake encounter, like hundreds of her colleagues had been. When this terrorist got high fever and went to a hospital to have her blood tested, she left a false name and a dud phone number with the doctor who was treating her. So, he could not get through to her to tell her that the test showed that she had the potentially fatal malaria falciparum. Anuradha's organs began to fail, one by one. By the time she was admitted to the hospital on 11 April, it was too late. And so, in this entirely unnecessary way, we lost her. She was 54 years old when she died, and had spent more than 30 years of her life, most of them underground, as a committed revolutionary. I never had the good fortune of meeting Anuradha Ghandy, but when I attended the memorial service after she died, I could tell that she was, above all, a woman who was not just greatly admired, but one who had been deeply loved. I was a little puzzled at the constant references that people who knew her made to her sacrifices. Presumably, by this, they meant that she had sacrificed the comfort and security of a middle-class life for radical politics. To me, however, Anuradha Ghandy comes across as someone who happily traded in tedium and banality to follow her dream. She was no saint or missionary. She lived an exhilarating life that was hard, but fulfilling. The young Anuradha, like so many of her generation, was inspired by the Naxalite uprising in West Bengal. As a student in Elphinstone College, she was deeply affected by the famine that stalked rural Maharashtra in the 1970s. It was working with the victims of desperate hunger that set her thinking and pitchforked her into her journey into militant politics. She began her working life as a lecturer in Wilson College in Mumbai, but by 1982, she shifted to Nagpur. After the next few years, she worked in Nagpur, Chandrapur, Amravati, Jabalpur, and Yavatmal, organizing the poorest of the poor, construction workers, coal mine workers, and deepening her understanding of the Dalit movement. In the late 1990s, even though she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, she went to Bastar and lived in the Dandakaranya forest with the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, PLGA, for 3 years. Here, she worked to strengthen and expand the extraordinary women's organization, perhaps the biggest feminist organization in the country, the Krantikari Adivasi Mahila Sangatan, COMS, that has more than 90,000 members. The COMS is probably one of India's best-kept secrets. Anuradha always said that the most fulfilling years of her life were these years that she spent with the People's War, now CPI Maoist, guerrillas, and Dandakaranya. When I visited the area almost 2 years after Anuradha's death, I shared her awe and excitement about the COMS and had to rethink some of my own easy assumptions about women and armed struggle. In an essay in this collection, writing under the pseudonym Avanti, Anuradha says, quote, "As we approach March 8, early in the dawn of this new century, remarkable developments are taking place on the women's front in India. Deep in the forests and plains of central India, in the backward villages of Andhra Pradesh, and up in the hills among the tribals in the state, in the forests and plains of Bihar and Jharkhand, women are getting organized actively to break the shackles of feudal patriarchy and make the new democratic revolution. It is a woman's liberation movement of peasant women in rural India, a part of the people's war being waged by the oppressed peasantry under revolutionary leadership. For the past few years, thousands of women are gathering in hundreds of villages to celebrate 8 March. Women are gathering together to march through the streets of a small town like Naranyapur to oppose the Miss World Beauty Contest. They're marching with their children through the tehsil towns and market villages in backward Bastar to demand proper schooling for their children. They're blocking roads to protest against rape cases and confronting the police to demand that the sale of liquor be banned. And hundreds of young women are becoming guerrilla fighters in the army of the oppressed, throwing off the shackles of their traditional life of drudgery. Dressed in fatigues, a red star on their olive green caps, a rifle on their shoulders, these young women, brimming with the confidence that the fight against patriarchy is integrally linked to the fight against the ruling classes of this semi-feudal, semi-colonial India, are equipping themselves with the military knowledge to take on the third largest army of the exploiters. This is a social and political awakening among the poorest of the poor women in rural India. It is a scenario that has emerged far from the unseeing eyes of the bourgeois media, far from the flash and glitter of TV cameras. They're the signs of a transformation coming into the lives of the rural poor as they participate in the great struggle for revolution. But this revolutionary women's movement has not emerged overnight, and nor has it emerged spontaneously merely from propaganda. The women's movement has grown with the growth of armed struggle. Contrary to general opinion, the launching of armed struggle in the early 1980s by the communist revolutionary forces in various parts of the country, the militant struggle against feudal oppression gave the confidence to peasant women to participate in struggles in large numbers, and then to stand up and fight for their rights. Women who constitute the most oppressed among the oppressed, poor peasant and landless peasant women, who have lacked not only an identity and voice, but also a name, have become activists for the women's organizations in their villages and guerrilla fighters. Thus, with the spread and growth of the armed struggle, the women's mobilization and women's organization have also grown, leading to the emergence of this revolutionary women's movement, one of the strongest and most powerful women's movements in the country today. But it is unrecognized and ignored, a ploy of the ruling classes that will try to suppress any news and acknowledgement as long as it can." End quote. Her obvious enthusiasm for the women's movement in Dandakaranya did not blind her to the problems that women comrades faced within the revolutionary movement. At the time of her death, that is what she was working on: how to purge the Maoist party of the vestiges of continuing discrimination against women and the various shades of patriarchy that stubbornly persisted among those male comrades who called themselves revolutionary. In the time I spent with the PLGA in Bastar, many comrades remembered her with such touching affection. Comrade Janaki was the name they knew her by. They had a worn photograph of her in fatigues and her huge trademark glasses, standing in the forest, beaming, with a rifle slung over her shoulder. She's gone now. Anu, Avanti, Janaki. And she's left her comrades with a sense of loss they may never get over. She has left behind this sheaf of paper, these writings, notes, and essays. And I have been given the task of introducing them to a wider audience. It has been hard to work out how to read these writings. Clearly, they were not written with a view to be published as a collection. At first reading, they could come off somewhat basic, often repetitive, a little didactic. But a second and third reading made me see them differently. I see them now as Anuradha's notes to herself. Their sketchy, uneven quality, the fact that some of her assertions explode off the page like hand grenades, makes them that much more personal. Reading through them, you catch glimpses of the mind of someone who could have been a serious scholar or academic, but was overtaken by her conscience and found it impossible to sit back and merely theorize about the terrible injustices she saw around her. These writings reveal a person who is doing all she can to link theory and practice, action and thought. Having decided to do something real and urgent for the country she lived in, and the people she lived amongst, in these writings, Anuradha tries to tell us, and herself, why she became a Marxist-Leninist, and not a liberal activist, or a radical feminist, or an eco-feminist, or an Ambedkarite. To do this, she takes us on a basic guided tour of a history of these movements, with quick, thumbnail analyses of various ideologies, ticking off their advantages and drawbacks like a teacher correcting an examination paper with a thick fluorescent marker. The insights and observations sometimes lapse into easy sloganeering, but often they're profound and occasionally they're epiphanic, and could only have come from someone who has a razor-sharp political mind and knows her subject intimately, from observation and experience, not merely from history and sociology textbooks. Perhaps Anuradha Ghandy's greatest contribution, in her writing as well as the politics she practiced, is her work on gender and on Dalit issues. She is sharply critical of the orthodox Marxist interpretation of caste as class, as being somewhat intellectually lazy. She points out that her own party has made mistakes in the past in not being able to understand the caste issue properly. She critiques the Dalit movement for turning into an identity struggle, reformist, not revolutionary, futile in its search for justice within an intrinsically unjust social system. She believes that without dismantling the patriarchy and the caste system, brick by painful brick, there can be no new democratic revolution. In her writings on caste and gender, Anuradha Ghandy shows us a mind and an attitude that is unafraid of nuance, unafraid of dogma, unafraid of telling it like it is, to her comrades as well as to the system that she fought against all her life. What a woman she was. Remembering Anuradha Ghandy. Friend, comrade, moving spirit. I remain a song dedicated to the revolution. This thirst will end only with my life. Chera Bandaraju. On the morning of 12 April 2008, Anuradha Ghandy breathed her last. The revolutionary movement in India and the world, and the oppressed masses in general, lost a dynamic, dedicated, and unwavering fighter and teacher at the relatively young age of 54. Comrade Anuradha had just returned after spending a week in Jharkhand, taking classes for leading women activists from Jharkhand, mostly from tribal backgrounds, on the question of women's oppression. On 6 April, when the blood tests after she was struck by high fever did not show any signs of malaria, little did she or her comrades realize that the fever was caused by falciparum malaria, and that would prove fatal. Her frail and diminutive body, which had withstood many a battle since a young age, had already been weakened by systemic sclerosis, an autoimmune disease that had affected her hands and had begun slowly eating into her heart and lungs. On 11 April morning, when the diagnosis confirmed falciparum malaria, she was hospitalized immediately. By then, it was already too late, as her weakened organs began giving away. As always, she struggled valiantly, but the end came within 24 hours on 12 April morning. It seemed as though even in her death, Comrade Anuradha stuck to her lifelong motto of never wasting a minute. The early years. Anuradha Shanbug, fondly called Anu by everyone who knew her, was born on 28 March 1954 to a Gujarati mother and Kannadiga father. Both her parents, along with all her maternal uncles and aunts, were members of the undivided Communist Party of India. Her parents themselves had got married in the CPI office in Mumbai in the 1940s. Thus, Anu grew up in an atmosphere of rational and progressive thinking. Her late father, Ganesh Shanbug, was a well-known lawyer in the Bombay High Court, while her mother, Kumud Shanbug, at the age of 79, continues to work as a librarian and resource person for a women's resource center in Mumbai. Anuradha was the elder of their 2 children. Her brother Sunil Shanbug is the noted theater and film director. The desire to do something for the downtrodden was easily nurtured in an atmosphere of serious study, intellectual creativity, and rational thinking right from her childhood. In this atmosphere, she excelled academically in both school and college. Ganesh Shanbug wrote in his memoir, Kaveri to Ganga, that Anuradha, their firstborn, was dedicated by them to the revolution. Kumud Shanbug remembers the young Anuradha as a bundle of energy, very purposeful and yet ready to burst into anger at seeing any form of injustice to animals or the housemaid. For Sunil, Anu, who was 2.5 years older, was a close sibling who was responsible for giving him a worldview. As he was in a boarding school, she would write him in long letters explaining the importance of every event that was affecting the country. A brilliant student, Comrade Anuradha began as a committed cadre of the incipient revolutionary movement right from her days at Elphinstone College, Bombay, in the early 1970s. Those were the days when urban students were not oblivious to the bitter struggles of rural people. That too at a time when rural Maharashtra was facing one of the worst famines. The young Anuradha, along with a group of students, threw themselves into famine relief work. She was deeply affected by the horrors of famine that had ravaged the lives of the rural poor, and at the same time, inspired by their indomitable spirit of survival. The early 1970s was also the time when the whole world was in the grip of militant struggles and revolutions. The anti-Vietnam War movement in the US, the daring students' revolt in Paris, the heroic struggles that led to the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, GPCR, in China, among others. In India, the spark of Naxalbari, which lit the prairie fire of revolution in India, inspired thousands of students to give up their careers in education, to leave for the countryside, to be with the masses in their daring dream, to carve out a new world free from all forms of exploitation. Comrade Anuradha came into contact with the student organization, Progressive Youth Movement, Prayam, which was inspired by the Naxalite movement. They started working in the slums, which helped her to come in close contact with the Dalit movement, where she received her early exposure to the continuing reality of untouchability and caste oppression. It was at the same time that she began reading voraciously, digging deeper into the warp and weft of Marxism as a touchstone to understand the basis of the oppressive and exploitative caste system and all the other ills of society. She went on to do her MA and later MPhil in sociology. She began teaching as a lecturer, first at Wilson College, Chowpatty, and then at Chunchunwala College, Kotkupar. Her fervor and diligence made her a very popular and effective lecturer and a favorite amongst her students. In November 1977, she married Comrade Gandhi, a fellow comrade. The post-emergency period saw Anuradha becoming one of the leading figures of the civil liberties movement in the country. She was a founding member of the Committee for the Protection of Democratic Rights, CPDR, in Maharashtra. She played a prominent role alongside such leading figures as V.M. Tarkunde, Govinda Mukhoti, Subbarao, Sudeshved, P.A. Sebastian, and even ruling class elements such as George Fernandez and Arun Shuri in organizing the landmark 1977 Civil Liberties Conference in Delhi. One of the prominent demands of this conference was for the release of political prisoners. The committed revolutionary. In response to the clarion call given by the nascent revolutionary movement in Gadchiroli district of Maharashtra in the early 1980s, and urged by the need to spread the message of revolution in a backward region like Vidarbha, Comrade Anuradha took the radical decision to leave Bombay and shift to Nagpur in 1982. While teaching at Nagpur University, she actively participated in and played a leading role in the trade union and Dalit movement in the region. In trade union work, she began by organizing the Mulkarins, household labor of Nagpur, and then in various other sectors. She was actively involved in organizing the 5,000-strong construction workers at the Karparkeda thermal power plant near Nagpur and led a number of militant struggles, most notably a 3-month strike facing the collective might of construction companies, as well as intense police repression. During the course of these struggles, Comrade Anu went to jail on numerous occasions. In 1993, Comrade Anu shifted to Chandrapur to help organize the coal mine and construction workers there. She fought against the fact that the unorganized sector workers had no basic trade union rights, and at the same time were totally ignored by traditional unions. She also developed links for joint activities with other progressive trade union leaders of the region, from Nagpur, Chandrapur, Amravati, Jabalpur, Yotmal, and other surrounding centers. Comrade Anu made path-breaking contributions to organizing Dalits in Vidarbha. She shifted residents in Nagpur to Indira, a predominantly Dalit locality and a stronghold of the city's Dalit leaders. Comrade Anu's incisive knowledge of Ambedkar's and other sociological writings on the caste system, seen in the light of Marxism, drew large sections of the youth to the Naxalite movement. She grew to become the open face of the Maoists and the Dalit movement, and one of the major public speakers at many Dalit functions in Vidarbha. Comrade Anuradha wrote profusely on the caste question in both English and Marathi, presenting a class viewpoint on the issue, countering not only the numerous postmodernist trends on this count, but the wrong Marxist interpretations of the Dalit and caste questions as well. An important essay written by Comrade Anuradha in Marathi was published in Satyashodak Marxvati, the journal edited by Shanrad Patil from Thule, explaining the Marxist standpoint on the Dalit question, linking Dalit liberation with the task of the New Democratic Revolution, NDR, in the country. This essay is still referred to today as an example of the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint on caste. The erstwhile CPI-MLPW prepared its first caste policy paper, which was the first for the revolutionary Marxist movement in India, based on the draft prepared by Comrade Anuradha. This draft has categorically outlined that in India, the democratization of society is inconceivable without smashing the elitist caste system and fighting all forms of caste oppression, most particularly its crudest form, untouchability. Many of the views expressed by her then in the mid-1990s have become the core of the understanding of the present revolutionary movement. The Call of Bastar. In the late 1990s, Comrade Anuradha responded to the call of the revolutionary movement and went to Bastar. She spent 3 years living among the tribals of the region. She went out of her way to gather as many PhD studies on the Gond tribals to provide source materials for the revolutionary cadre of Dandakaranya to deepen their understanding of the region. Later on, she would say with utmost conviction that these 3 years were among the most fulfilling in her life. She keenly studied the lives and struggles of the Gond tribals of Bastar, the painstaking ways in which the movement was built, particularly focusing on the lives of the women, their organizations, the comms, and the women in the guerrilla detachments. During the peak of the famine in 1997, Comrade Anuradha was there in Bastar, which saw hundreds of people perish of starvation in other tribal areas. The revolutionary guerrillas had resorted to seizing grain from the hoarders and distributing them among the starving masses, thus preventing a major calamity. During this period, intermittent attacks of malaria, the terrible dry heat of summer, coupled with the famine conditions, took a toll on her health, and she lost about 10 kilograms. It was only her enormous commitment to the cause of the people and tremendous willpower that kept her going. She never made a show of her own sufferings, always bearing pain, whether physical or mental, with dignity, without complaining or letting others know. All this was happening amidst heavy state repression, at a time when the armed contingents of the mercenary paramilitary forces were tracking every inch of the Bastar forests, and when living life on the edge was the norm for the revolutionary. Comrade Anuradha lived up to the challenge unflinchingly. She once even had a narrow escape after coming under the crossfire of the police. She would point out to others that this was the hard reality of 21st century rural India. To be with the masses, to understand them, and to be like them is also to place yourself at risk of getting killed. Today, the The forests, hills, and valleys of India have become the hunting ground of the predators in the form of multinational corporations and India's large capitalists, with the greedy politicians ready to grab any crumb thrown at him. In Bastar, Comrade Anuradha spent most of her time in the Biramgad area, which has later come into the limelight for facing the brunt of the Salva Judum attacks. She contracted malaria a number of times, but it was treated in time and with the good care of the local tribal people. Her tenacity to stay in such difficult conditions, and despite her age, astounded and won the affection of the local tribals. During this period, she also spent much time in taking classes on women's health issues, women's oppression, and the new democratic revolution, on imparting general knowledge, on the rudiments of Marxism, etc., mainly for the growing leadership among the tribal women. She helped draft handbills and wrote numerous articles for the local revolutionary movement. Towards the last part of her stay, she was responsible for the West Bastar area covering what is known as the National Park region. This, too, is a region which is affected by the onslaught of the Salva Judum. Reaching the pinnacle. For the last 15 years, till the end, Comrade Anuradha had been working among the most downtrodden, braving state repression. She was deeply involved in developing a perspective on the role of a revolutionary women's movement and the need to organize the most oppressed woman in realizing new democratic revolution free from all forms of oppression, exploitation, and discrimination. At the time of her death, Comrade Anuradha was studying the problems facing the woman comrades in the revolutionary movement. She was deeply involved in the inquiry of the varied forms and shades of patriarchy that women had to face every day, so as to devise a method to enable them to grow to greater leadership responsibilities. A person of high principles, Comrade Anuradha had the modesty to be a willing learner, always willing to acknowledge the positive in others, even with those with whom she differed, no matter what her differences. While being creative and not stereotyped in her thinking, she was always firm on the proletarian line and Marxist ideology. Comrade Anuradha was a founding member of the CPI Marxist-Leninist Party in Maharashtra. At the time of her martyrdom, she had risen to become a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of India, Maoist. At the 9th Congress, Unity Congress, she was the single woman comrade to be elected to its Central Committee. The repressive state machinery, which allows so many criminals, communalist murderers, politicians, and affluent people to continue with their harmful activities, banned the party for which she worked, and made a dynamic leader like Comrade Anuradha inaccessible to vast sections of society. Many great leaders of the Indian freedom struggle, like Bhagat Singh, Subhash Chandra Bose, and numerous others, believed in the necessity of armed struggle, because of which they had to live under the oppressive British Raj under changed identities in order to evade imprisonment or death at the hands of the state's repressive machinery. Today, the situation is no different. While we uphold martyrs like Bhagat Singh as great leaders, modern-day revolutionaries like Anuradha are portrayed as dangerous criminals and terrorists. But the oppressed and exploited people, totally neglected by the same state, have great respect and love for revolutionaries like Anuradha. Wherever she worked, Comrade Anuradha reached out and touched the lives of many, who will see her as a leading figure of the revolution and who became a martyr for its cause. For the oppressed and exploited people of this country, Comrade Anuradha will always remain immortal. You are history. You are legend. You are the heroic example of democracy's solidarity and universality. We shall not forget you, and when the olive tree of peace puts forth its leaves again, come back. La Pasionara.